Okay, so quick question for you and for everyone listening. I'm going to put you on the spot right at the start.
Uh-oh. I'm ready.
If I asked you to name, the single greatest traveler in human history, someone who saw more of the globe than anyone else before the age of, like, steamships and airplanes, who is the first person that pops into your head?
Oh, that's easy. It's Marco Polo. It's almost a reflex action, isn't it?
It is. I'm willing to bet money that for 99% of people, the answer is Marco Polo. He just has the brand recognition.
Absolutely. He's got the TV shows. He's got the pool game, for goodness sake. He is the standard unit of measurement for pre-modern travel.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Marco Polo, his journey was, what, roughly 24,000 kilometers?
Yeah, about that. Which is, I mean, that's incredibly impressive for the 13th century. It's certainly nothing to sneeze at.
Right. But the man we're digging into today, he didn't just beat that record, he absolutely shattered it.
Oh, it's not even in the same league.
We're talking about a man who logged roughly 117,000 kilometers.
117,000.
That's about 73,000 miles. The number itself is just, it's hard to even comprehend.
Well, to put that raw number into perspective, that's the equivalent of walking around the circumference of the Earth.
Yeah.
3 times. And he did this starting in 1325.
No planes, no trains, no GPS, no TripAdvisor, just camels, rickety wooden ships that were liable to sink if the wind changed, and, his own 2 feet.
He even out-traveled the famous Chinese admiral Zheng He.
Right. Zheng He, his massive treasure fleets covered about 50,000 kilometers, which is, again, amazing. But this guy, he more than doubled it.
So yeah, we're talking about the undisputed heavyweight champion of pre-modern travel.
And the timeline is just as staggering as the distance. He left his home in Tangier, Morocco in 1325, and he was only 21 years old.
Just a kid, really. And he didn't return for good until nearly 30 years later. I mean, imagine leaving your house today in the mid-2020s and not coming back until the 2050s.
And in that time, you've seen nearly every major civilization on Earth.
It's unbelievable.
That is exactly the mission for this deep dive. We aren't just tracing a line on a map. We are trying to understand the entire medieval world through the eyes of this one man.
We want to see how he did it, how he navigated from North Africa all the way to China, and from the freezing steppes of Russia down to the tropical Swahili coast.
It really is the ultimate case study in globalization before. Well, before globalization was a word.
And we get to explore how a single scholar moved through this vast Dar al-Islam, the abode of Islam. We see the cultural shocks he faced, because, believe me, not every Muslim society he visited was the same.
Oh, not at all.
And of course, we have to address the big controversy, whether he actually went to all the places he said he did.
Right, the fake news allegations. We will definitely get into the forensic analysis of his route later on. But for now, our main source for all of this is his own travelogue. It's called The Rila.
The Rila, yeah. The full title is actually a bit of a mouthful.
It's a great title, though. A gift to those who contemplate the wonders of cities and the marvels of traveling.
It's very poetic. But that title also hints at the nature of the book itself. This wasn't a scientific journal or a captain's log. It was literature. It was meant to be entertaining.
And here's the kicker, and this is so important to remember. He didn't write it down as he went.
No. He dictated the entire thing from memory, years after he finally got back home.
So we're dealing with the fog of memory, probably some literary embellishment and the influence of the scribe who was actually writing it all down. But let's start at the beginning. Let's start at ground zero. Who was this guy before he became a legend?
Well, his full name was Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Lawati al-Tanji ibn Battuta.
Okay, we'll stick with Ibn Battuta.
Yeah, he was born in Tangier, Morocco on February 24, 1304. And his family background is crucial for understanding his entire life. They were a family of Islamic legal scholars, or qadis.
So he had this very specific, very respected education.
Exactly. He was trained in the Maliki school of Islamic law. This is key. He wasn't a merchant looking for profit. He wasn't a soldier looking for conquest. He was an educated, well-connected man of the law.
And before we get too deep into his legal credentials, I have to throw in this fun fact I found. His patronymic name, Ibn Battuta, literally means son of a duckling.
It does. It's such an oddly cute detail, isn't it?
It's delightful. It completely humanizes him. You picture this hardened survivor of shipwrecks and plagues, the man who crossed the Hindu Kush, and his name is basically Duckling Jr.
It's fantastic. But his reason for leaving home was, of course, very serious. In 1325, at 21, he set out to perform the Hajj.
The pilgrimage to Mecca, a fundamental religious duty for all able-bodied Muslims.
Right. But for him, it seems to have sparked something much, much deeper. He describes this overmastering impulse to see the world. It wasn't just about getting to Mecca. It was about the act of leaving, the journey itself.
There's this quote from the very beginning of his book that it really hits you in the gut. He's leaving his parents, whom he obviously loves. He knows the road is dangerous.
Yeah, that quote is amazing.
He says, I set out alone, having neither fellow traveler in whose companionship I might find cheer, nor caravan whose part I might join, but swayed by an overmastering impulse within me.
It's so powerful. And he continues, I braced my resolution to quit my dear ones, female and male, and forsook my home as birds forsake their nests.
As birds forsake their nest, that image, I mean, that's a writer right there.
It is. And he knows that his parents were still alive when he left, and the separation just weighed so heavily on him. He writes about weeping as he left Tangier. He wouldn't return to Morocco for 24 years.
24 years. Can you imagine? By the time he came back, the world he knew, and especially the people in it, would be completely different.
So he heads east. He starts crossing North Africa through what were then the sultanates of Abd el-Wadid and Hafsid. It's a long, arduous journey.
And he eventually makes it to the great city of Alexandria in the spring of 1326. And this is where the story takes a turn, doesn't it? It gets a little mystical.
It really does.
Yeah.
This is a pivotal moment in the narrative of the Rila. Now, whether this happened exactly as he describes or if it's a literary device he used later to frame his life, we can't be sure.
Right, it's part of the story he's telling about himself.
Exactly. But the story goes that he meets this ascetic, a holy man named Sheikh Burhanuddin. And the sheikh looks at this young man from Morocco and seems to see his entire future.
He says something like, it seems to me that you are fond of foreign travel.
Which, is a pretty safe bet.
Yeah, he's in Alexandria, a long way from home. Good guess.
But then the sheikh gets incredibly specific. He says, you must visit my brother Fariduddin in India, my brother Rukanuddin in Sind, and my brother Burhanuddin in China. Convey my greetings to them.
That's not just a prediction, that's a travel itinerary. India, Sind, which is modern-day Pakistan and China, for a Moroccan in 1326, that is basically the ends of the known world.
Precisely. It frames his entire journey not as random wandering, but as a kind of mission, a destiny. And it doesn't stop there.
Oh, right, there was another mystic.
Yes, another holy man, Sheikh Murshidi, interpreted a dream Ibn Battuta had. He saw himself on the wing of a great bird, flying east towards Mecca and then beyond. Murshidi told him it confirmed he was destined to travel the world.
So in his mind, and certainly in the story he tells us, this wasn't just a gap year that got out of hand, it was destiny. He had a divine appointment with the world.
A divine appointment, I like that.
But, destiny doesn't pay the bills. And this is something I always wonder about with these ancient travelers. How do you just keep going?
Yeah.
For 30 years, he wasn't a trader selling spices. He wasn't a soldier getting paid. How did he survive?
And that question brings us right back to his background, the key to everything. He wasn't just a tourist. He was a highly trained scholar.
His education was his passport.
It was more than a passport. We have to understand the concept of the Dar al-Islam. In the 14th century, the Islamic world stretched from the Atlantic coast of Africa all the way to Southeast Asia. And across this massive expanse, the educated elite shared a common language, Arabic, and a common legal and religious framework, Sharia law.
So it's like having a global visa and a universal professional license all in one.
In a way, yes. That's a great way to put it. Everywhere he went, North Africa, Persia, India, the Swahili coast, the ruling class or the religious establishment spoke his language. He could walk into almost any town, go to the main mosque or the ruler's court, introduce himself as a Maliki scholar from the far west, and he'd instantly find a network of support.
And not just, a place to sleep and a meal, but actual employment, right?
Precisely. Because he was trained as a qadi, a judge, he was a valuable commodity. Think about it. Kings and sultans in these frontier regions like India or the Maldives, they were desperate for trained legal scholars to legitimize their rule and properly enforce religious law.
So he was in demand.
Highly in demand. So Ibn Battuta often served as a judge wherever he went. This gave him status, it gave him a very generous income, and crucially, it gave him political protection. He wasn't just some random backpacker, he was an official of the state.
It wasn't always about official jobs, though. Sometimes it was just aggressive hospitality. I absolutely love the section about his time in Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey.
Ah, yes, the Fitiyan.
The Fitiyan, these young brotherhoods. It sounds kind of like a fraternity, but seemingly much, much nicer.
It was a fascinating social institution. They were basically associations of young artisans, tanners, bakers, butchers, that sort of thing. And their entire code of honor was based on chivalry, generosity, and hospitality to strangers.
He describes how different groups of these Fijian would actually compete with each other to host him. They'd meet him on the road outside of town and argue over who had the honor of feeding and housing him.
I mean, it's just wild. He says he stayed in their hospices in over 25 different towns across Anatolia.
Yeah.
And he was just overwhelmed by it. They would throw these huge feasts for him. They'd recite poetry. They'd dance.
Just contrast that with modern travel, where you're lucky if you can find a clean public restroom, let alone a group of strangers fighting to give you a free place to stay and a 5-course meal.
It really speaks to a very different social fabric, where hospitality wasn't just a kindness, it was a currency of honor. But of course, Ibn Battuta didn't just stay in safe, comfortable towns. He was constantly pushing into the unknown.
So, after his first Hajj and his time in the Middle East visiting Mecca, Baghdad, Persia, he doesn't head home. He heads south.
He does. He heads for the sea.
Let's talk about that highlights reel, because his journey is just so varied. He heads down the Swahili coast of East Africa around 1330 or maybe 1332, and his first big stop is Mogadishu in today's Somalia.
And his description is amazing because it shatters our modern preconceptions. He describes Mogadishu as an exceedingly large city. We often forget how wealthy and powerful these Indian Ocean trade hubs were.
He talks about the rich merchants and these high-quality fabrics they exported, which were famous all over the region.
And he mentions that the Sultan spoke both the local Somali language and Arabic fluently, again, highlighting that bilingual connection to the wider Islamic world. He was part of this global network.
And then he goes even further south to Kilwa in modern Tanzania. This description really stuck with me. He calls it one of the finest built towns he had seen.
With houses made of wood and reeds, he says. But the Grand Mosque of Kilwa, that was built of coral stone. It was a major center for the gold trade coming out of the interior of Africa, from places like Great Zimbabwe. Ibn Battuta was witnessing the absolute peak of Swahili civilization.
It's incredible, but then in true Ibn Battuta fashion, he goes from the tropical coast of Africa to the complete opposite environment, the freezing steppes of Russia and Ukraine.
This part of the journey feels like it's straight out of a fantasy novel. He travels to the territory of the Golden Horde, the Mongols who ruled that region.
And he describes their capital not as a city of stone, but as a wagon city.
The Orda. It was a mobile court. The Khan, whose name was Erzbeg Khan, didn't live in a fixed place. He moved with his people and their herds. So Ibn Battuta describes this massive, moving city of enormous wagons, huge felt tents called yurts, and livestock as far as the eye can see.
And this is where he goes on the ultimate side quest. He somehow manages to talk his way into an expedition escorting one of the Khan's pregnant wives, a princess named Bailun, back to her hometown to give birth.
Right, which was a tradition, but her hometown just happens to be Constantinople,
the capital of the Christian Byzantine Empire.
This is a huge deal. Princess Bailun was actually the illegitimate daughter of the Byzantine Emperor Andronikos III. By joining her escort, Ibn Battuta gets this incredible, rare opportunity to step completely outside the Dar al-Islam and into its great rival.
And he meets the emperor, he visits the Hagia Sophia, though he makes a point of saying he didn't go inside the main sanctuary.
Why not?
Because he would have had to bow to the cross, which as a devout Muslim he refused to do. But still, the fact that he was there being treated as a dignitary, it just shows how fluid the borders could be between these worlds, despite the obvious religious differences.
It was an incredible detour, but his eyes were always set on that prophecy. He needed to get to India. And this next leg of the journey, well, this is where the word adventure starts to feel a lot more like life-threatening ordeal.
Right. To get to India from Central Asia, he has to cross the Hindu Kush Mountains in what's now Afghanistan.
And he gives us a really grim etymology for that name. He writes that Hindu Kush literally means Hindu slayer.
Wow.
Because, he says, so many of the slaves brought from India died on the mountain, passes from the intense cold and snow. It's a really stark reminder of the brutality of the era.
He survives the crossing, though, and reaches the Indus River in 1333. He's finally in India, heading for Delhi to meet the Sultan, Muhammad bin Tughluq. Now, from everything I've read, the Sultan is a character.
That is perhaps the greatest understatement we could make. Muhammad bin Tughluq was arguably the wealthiest man in the entire Muslim world at that time. He was also a brilliant intellectual who loved philosophy and debate, but He was also incredibly erratic, deeply paranoid, and shockingly violent.
A dangerous combination.
The most dangerous. He would execute people, even high-ranking officials, on a whim for the slightest perceived offense.
And Ibn Battuta walks right into this lion's den. And of course, because he's an educated legal scholar, the Sultan immediately appoints him as a qadi, a judge for the city of Delhi.
And he's showered with wealth. The Sultan gives him a huge salary, a beautiful house, servants. He's living the high life. But he writes about being constantly deeply terrified.
He describes the scene at the Sultan's palace where executioners were always standing by the gate. He says there was essentially a daily quota of dead bodies being dragged out. Ibn Battuta was walking this incredibly fine tightrope.
For 6 years. One day he'd be a trusted advisor. The next he'd fall under suspicion of treason for associating with the wrong person. He lived like this for 6 long years.
I can't even imagine the stress. So finally, he wants out. He tries to resign. He tries to tell the Sultan he wants to go on another pilgrimage, but the Sultan refuses to let him go.
But then, the Sultan comes up with a new plan for him. He decides to make Ibn Battuta his ambassador to the Yuan dynasty in China. This is his escape ticket.
It's the perfect way out. He gets to leave with the Sultan's blessing, and he gets to fulfill the last part of that prophecy from the Sheikh in Alexandria.
A golden ticket, or so he thought. The year is 1341. He sets off with this massive retinue, loaded down with lavish gifts and slaves for the Mongol Emperor of China. But the journey just to get to the coast is an absolute disaster.
It's a complete nightmare. First, they get attacked by bandits. Ibn Battuta is separated from his group. He's robbed of everything. He's kidnapped, and he's nearly killed. He barely escapes with his life.
He eventually finds his way back to his group, but they've lost a lot of men and supplies. Then, when they finally get to the port of Calicut and are about to sail to China, a sudden storm hits.
Right. And Ibn Battuta is on the shore. He'd gone to attend Friday prayers at the mosque. And he watches as one of the ships, the one carrying all his luggage, all the official gifts for the emperor, and all of his personal slaves, is hit by the storm, breaks apart, and sinks right in front of him.
And the captain of the other ship in his fleet sees this happen, panics, and just sails away.
Sails away without him, with the rest of his party.
Just leaves him there. Stranded.
Can you even imagine that moment? You're the ambassador, you've just lost all the state gifts, you've lost the ships. You absolutely cannot go back to the Sultan in Delhi because he will almost certainly have you executed for your failure. You are stuck on the coast of India with absolutely nothing.
This is where you really see the resilience of the man. He doesn't give up. He doesn't just curl up in a ball. He decides, okay, I need a plan B. He decides to make a detour to the Maldives.
He figures it'll just be a short stop, a place to regroup before trying to get to China another way.
Spoiler alert, it was not a short stop.
Not at all.
No.
Because the Maldives, these paradise islands in the Indian Ocean, had only recently converted to Islam, and they had a problem. They didn't have enough scholars who knew the intricate details of Islamic law.
So when they find out that this distinguished traveler who's just washed up on their shores is a highly trained qadi from Morocco, well, they see an opportunity.
They basically bribe him to stay. They offer him pearls, gold, slaves, and the hand of the vizier's daughter in marriage.
Right. And this brings up the more personal side of Ibn Battuta's life, which he's surprisingly open about. He ends up marrying 4 wives in the Maldives, which is the maximum allowed by Islamic law at one time. And he also takes on several concubines.
He actually notes in the Rila that marriage in the Maldives was often seen as a kind of temporary arrangement for visiting travelers because the women generally didn't travel themselves.
So it sounds like a traveler's paradise. But this is also where we see a huge clash of cultures. Ibn Battuta was not a laid-back guy when it came to religion. He was a very strict, orthodox, legal scholar.
And the local Maldivian customs didn't quite line up with his strict interpretation of the law?
Not at all. This is a major theme throughout his book, his personal orthodoxy versus local customs. In the Maldives, for example, women traditionally didn't cover their upper bodies. They went around topless.
And Ibn Battuta was absolutely horrified by this.
He tried to force them to cover up. He issued decrees. He basically failed completely. He also ordered that any man who missed Friday prayers should be publicly whipped.
Wow. He went full Sheriff of Nottingham on them.
He really did. And eventually, his strictness, combined with him getting tangled up in local political intrigues, made him so unpopular that he was basically forced to resign his position as chief judge and flee the islands.
So he's on the move again. He finally heads east, for real this time. He passes through Sumatra, which he calls Samudra Pasai, and then he mentions this mysterious place called Tawalisi.
Ah, Tawalisi. This part is highly debated among historians. We still aren't sure where it was. Maybe the Philippines, maybe Vietnam, maybe somewhere else entirely.
And in this mysterious land, he claims to have met a warrior princess named Erduja.
Yes, the warrior princess Urduja, who supposedly spoke Turkish. The historicity of Urduja is, let's just say, very contested. Some scholars think she might be a complete fabrication, or maybe a composite of different local legends he heard.
Right, but eventually he claims to arrive in China in the year 1345. He says he landed in the great port city of Quanzhou, which the Arab and Persian merchants called Zaitun.
Which means olive in Arabic. And one of the first things Ibn Battuta notes, in a very characteristic complaint, is that despite the name, there were no olives to be found anywhere. He was very confused by that.
Classic. He observes the large Muslim quarter in the city where foreign merchants lived. He praises the safety of the roads, the use of paper money, which amazed him, and the quality of the silk and porcelain.
But he also had some sharp criticisms. He was pretty disgusted by the local diet. He mentioned seeing them sell frogs, pigs, and even dogs in the markets.
Which brings us to the big one, the China controversy. This is a huge topic in Ibn Battuta scholarship. Did he really go to China? Or at least, did he see as much of it as he claims?
It's the million-dollar question. And there's some pretty compelling reasons to be skeptical.
So why do people doubt him? What are the red flags?
Well, first, there are straightforward factual errors. He seems to confuse the Yellow River with the Grand Canal. He claims that porcelain is made from a type of coal, which is just completely wrong.
Okay, that sounds like something someone might say if they'd only heard a description of it but hadn't actually seen the process.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of plagiarism. Some sections of his description of Chinese cities bear a striking, almost word-for-word resemblance to the writings of earlier travelers, including Marco Polo and other Arab sources.
So his scribe, Ibn Juzay, might have just lifted those passages to fill in the gaps in his memory.
That's the leading theory.
Yeah.
And then there's the Great Wall,
The big one.
the big one. He asked around about the legendary rampart of Gog and Magog, which is how the Great Wall was known in the Islamic world. And he says he found no one who had actually seen it or knew anyone who had, which is very strange if he had traveled deep into northern China.
So what's the consensus among historians today?
The general consensus is that he very likely did visit the southern coastal port cities, like Quanzhou and Guangzhou. There were large Muslim trading communities there. But his accounts of traveling to Beijing and deep into the interior are almost certainly fabricated, based on hearsay and other people's books.
Fake news or not, he decides it's finally time to go home. It's 1346. He's been away for over 2 decades. He turns back towards Morocco. But the world that he is returning to is literally falling apart.
The Black Death. He arrives in Damascus in Syria in 1348, just as the plague is ravaging the entire region. His descriptions are apocalyptic.
The details are just grim. He reports the death toll in Damascus reached 2,400 people a day. In Cairo, it was losing 1,100 a day. He says the city of Gaza was almost completely depopulated. He's walking through a ghost world.
And amid all this global catastrophe, he starts to receive personal bad news. He learns that his father had died 15 years earlier. He had no idea.
And then in 1349, he finally arrives back in his hometown of Tangier after 24 years away, only to find out that his mother had died of the plague just a few months before his return.
It's absolutely heartbreaking. You travel the entire known world, you survive bandits and shipwrecks and paranoid sultans, and you come home to an empty house.
You would think at that point he would just settle down, maybe write a book, retire, live a quiet life as a judge.
You would think. But he was just pathologically restless. He couldn't stay put. After a brief trip to what was left of Muslim Spain, Al-Andalus, he decides to embark on one last great adventure.
He crossed the Sahara Desert to visit the Mali Empire from 1351 to 1354.
An incredibly dangerous journey in itself.
Yeah.
He describes stopping at the salt mining outpost of Tagaza, a village where the houses and even the mosque were built entirely out of massive slabs of salt.
He also complained that it was plagued by flies and the only water was brackish. It sounds miserable.
It does, but he pushes on and reaches the capital of the Mali Empire, where he meets the ruler, the Mansa Suleiman.
And his cultural judgments are on full display again, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. He complains that the female servants and even the daughters of the Sultan appeared naked in court. He describes being served traditional food, which he suspected was dog meat. And he's bewildered by the local custom of showing respect to the king by throwing dust over your own head.
But he's also an incredible observer. He gives us our first description of a hippopotamus, which he calls a river horse, and says the local boatmen were terrified of it.
And his account is so important historically. He provides some of the earliest written details on the trans-Saharan gold and salt trade. He's also the first person to ever write about the West African xylophone, the bala.
So, after this final epic journey, he finally returns to Morocco for good in 1354. And the Sultan of Morocco, a man named Abu Inan Faris, basically says, okay, your story's incredible. You have to write this down.
And thank goodness he did. But again, it's so important to remember, he didn't sit down and write it himself. He dictated it.
Right, to a scholar, a literary man named Ibn Juzay.
And this leads us to what historians call the oral problem. Ibn Battuta had lost his travel notes years and years ago when he was robbed in India. So this entire 1,000-page book covering 30 years of travel is dictated entirely from memory.
How is that even possible?
Well, he probably had a remarkable memory, but it was likely with some help from Ibn Juzay. Ibn Juzay wasn't just a scribe, he was a writer. He wanted the prose to be beautiful and compelling. So it's highly likely that he embellished the descriptions, polished the language, and, as we discussed with China, probably filled in gaps with excerpts from other famous travel books.
So the Rila is kind of a remix, part memory, part literature.
It's a mix. It's a blend of eyewitness history, hearsay, secondhand accounts, and literary flair. But that doesn't make it worthless. In fact, it's what makes it so fascinating.
Right. Even if he didn't go to every single spot on the map that he claims, the picture he paints of the 14th century world is just incredible and unparalleled.
Exactly. Court chroniclers write about wars and kings and dynasties. Ibn Battuta talks about what people ate, how they dressed, their customs around marriage and sex and slavery, their religious practices. It's social history on a scale that no one else ever recorded.
So what happened to him after the book was done?
He lived out the rest of his life as a judge in a town in Morocco. He died around 1368 or 1369. And for centuries, his work was largely forgotten, especially in the West. It wasn't until the 19th century that it was rediscovered and translated.
And now he has a huge shopping mall in Dubai named after him.
The Ibn Battuta Mall, yes. And the airport in his hometown of Tangier, and even a crater on the moon.
From son of a duckling to a crater on the moon. Not a bad legacy.
Not bad at all.
You know, it really makes you think we live in this world of Google Maps and instant translation and, 15-hour flights to the other side of the planet. We think we're so connected.
Right.
But Ibn Battuta reminds us of a time when a shared belief system, in his case Islam, was the only internet you needed to connect a traveler all the way from Morocco to China. So here's the final thought. If he were to travel today, would he find the world more connected than it was in his time, or more divided by the hard lines of borders and passports than it was in 1350?
That is the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
He crossed dozens of empires with just his knowledge and his faith as his passport. Today, with all our technology, he might not even get past the first customs checkpoint.
Something to mull over. Thanks for diving deep with us on this incredible journey.
It was a pleasure.
We'll see you on the next one.